I put out a call on Instagram last night for people to send me their paranormal stories. There were enough of these to just focus on this one thing: dreams that come true. Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff, and Joe the scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn, and
I'm Joe.
I've had enough dreams, like sleeping dreams where I was actually asleep, come true that when I was a teenager I kept a dream diary so I could prove it. I guess I just wanted to prove it to myself because there wasn't really anybody else to prove it to. So this subject has fascinated me for a long time. Have you ever had a dream like that?
A prophetic dream?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, you forget most of your dreams.
That's why it's important to have a dream diary.
I used to keep one, but it was so hit or miss, and there didn't seem to be a point, so
I'm just going to dive into some of these stories, and I paraphrased what they said without taking anything away from their story, just because when people text you, it often is weird. So this one guy, he was looking for a job, and he was doing like 10 interviews every week. So you can imagine he was anxious, and he was having dreams about this, and he was really freaking out, probably interior, like inside of himself, worrying about finding a job and how he was going to do on these interviews. So it really isn't weird that he had a dream about, or dreams about, these interviews. But what happened is he noticed that details from his dreams would happen in waking life, like during the interviews. And he also began writing down his dreams to prove it to himself. But he didn't give me any specific examples. I messaged him back and he didn't respond. So I don't have a specific example. But I thought that was interesting. Okay, that sounds like that's something that would make you think about that and wonder about it. This other one, this is kind of a stretch. An author I know sent me this story. No offense to her, but it's sort of a long shot. She said she had a dream one night where she was a coach at a softball game and she was on third base. I know nothing about baseball or softball. Do you?
No, not at all.
So it sounded to me like they have coaches for different areas of the playing field, and she was the coach on third base, which doesn't really make any sense to me, but okay, whatever. So one of the players, another woman, she'd made it to the third base and she was poised to run. She was ready to go. And the dreamer, the lady who told me this story, was trying to look for the perfect spot, the opportunity for her to do that, to run. And I guess she would then signal her or something when it was that time, or scream at her or something. And they were both watching the pitcher very closely while the runner is on third base, poised to run. The dreamer is the coach, watching the pitcher, looking for that opportunity for the runner to run. And that was the whole dream. That was it. The next morning, in waking life, she got a call from her literary agent. The agent told her about a conversation she'd had with an editor earlier that morning. And they were discussing the possibility of a 3-book deal for the author. Now, you can imagine that's a huge deal. To get a 3-book deal would be a tremendous offer for any author. Offer for an author. That's kind of difficult. But this author says she had no idea the conversation was going to happen, and she mentioned that her agent has conversations like that all the time without ever telling her, because she doesn't tell her unless it's going to transpire into something, and something's going to happen. So an interesting side note is that because of the time difference, the agent was having that conversation while the author was having that dream. But what does baseball or softball have to do with this situation with the agent and trying to find her a 3-book deal? This is how she interpreted the dream, and this is the part that I think, well, all right, I'll go there with you. The 3-book deal is symbolized as a runner on third base. The runner is the agent. Getting to home plate means finishing the deal. The author was an observer in the dream more than an active participant because the agent was doing all the work. And the pitcher symbolizes the editor she was pitching the deal to. Okay, well, that meant that to her.
So here's one thing, is when you're willing to treat things abstractly, like symbolically, you have tremendously more flexibility in interpretation of the thing. It's like,
oh yeah,
if you start looking things at analogical things, so analogies of things, you can, there's no limit to how much you can flex something, and like believably flex it. So like if you have a dream and you see like a pattern, it's like this. Try this exercise. Take the same dream and fit those same symbols to just a random made-up scenario that means nothing. You'd probably be able to do it, So I think it's kind of just bullshitting yourself.
Yeah, it reminds me of people who read the astrology article or column in a newspaper, which I used to do a long time ago. We're talking like 40 years ago, I used to do that. And they can fit what it says in there to their life.
Yeah.
But that's because they're only reading the one that pertains to them. If you read any of them, you could fit any of them to your life.
Yeah. And I think we've talked about this like with tarot cards. It's really, really pretty easy, I think, to see a pattern in your own life in anything, which is actually a great tool. You can use random things, take a thing, map it back into something else, and now you can do weird stuff with your original thing, So right. Like for instance, if you look at a different person's life, you can put yourself in their shoes, and now you have this whole other perspective,
right,
that allows you to work through your problems.
I do want to say, as it pertains to tarot cards, though, and I said this in our episode about tarot cards, the tarot cards are not the thing that's magical, if you want to use that term. It's the person who is reading the cards has intuitions and impressions, and that is what is the important part. Because yes, tarot cards are extremely vague and they can be applied to anybody. Not unlike dreams. So the fact that this woman found meaning in her dream, she never said whether she got the deal. I wonder if she got the 3-book deal. Anyway, I think that is the important part in many of these dream stories that I read online and in these messages, that it matters how you interpret it. The interpretation is the important part, what it means to you.
Now, if you had a dream and it wasn't prophetic, but you were interpreting it, and your interpretation somehow, psychically, clairvoyantly, whatever, was prophetic, then was it the dream or was it you?
The dream is you, though.
Yeah, but I mean, if you had not interpreted it, it's like this. Okay, what if all prophecy came from an angel? Angels sent the prophetic stuff. They whisper in your ear or whatever. But they can do it while you dream. They can do it while you're awake.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah.
So if you 100% could just like scan the prophecy and say, oh, this is the point where, it becomes prophetic. You have a dream. You scan your dream. No prophecy. You start interpreting it. Now you get your prophecy. And you scan your thoughts just now. There's where you know what I mean? So it's like one of those things. So yeah, like you are the source ultimately, because it's you either had the dream or you thought it or you heard it from an angel or whatever. It's interesting, the idea that maybe it isn't dreams at all. Maybe it's all interpretation,
True.
Your ability to interpret. So then, like somebody who has a prophetic dream, quote unquote, after they interpret it, it's prophecy, whatever. But then they go and look at entrails of dead animals, or like spatter ink on the wall or whatever.
I don't think that's how it works.
That's another source. It has nothing to do with like what the particular thing it is. It's them,
Right. Well, it's interesting you bring up angels, because I got several messages from religious people who had to chastise me for wanting, for asking for paranormal stories. This is just one comment. quote, "In Christianity, there are things such as prophetic dreams. Not all dreams, though, are from God. Seek God in everything." End quote. Okay, all I can say to somebody who believes that you shouldn't look at anything other than what has been identified as being from God is the thing I always come back to. Before we knew that pork caused trichinosis, people believed that this was something evil, that eating pork was evil. And in fact, Jewish people still do not eat pork because of this. It is not about God. It is about trichinosis. This is science. It's not something paranormal. So for me to say, I want to hear your paranormal stuff, it's only, in my mind, it's undiscovered things. It's nothing different from trichinosis or gravity or anything else. It's just not discovered yet, or not identified, not explained through science yet, because I believe it will. That reminds me, I had to say something before I go on to the next story. So I guess it's because I looked up the stuff about near-death experiences, and then Google decided it was going to serve up suggestions of articles that I would want to read. And so I had several articles that came up in my news feed about near-death experiences. And at least one of them, and now they're all together in my mind because it was very early this morning when I was reading these, at least one of them was definitely from a sciencey point of view, medical/science. And this is the part that stuck with me, that in their experiments, well, how they did these experiments is there was a lady who'd had something catastrophic happen to her, and she was in a coma, and she was brain dead, and they checked her, and she was brain dead, and they kept her alive for a while, and then the family decided to pull the plug. And because it was a planned thing, and they somehow got permission, they hooked her up so they could watch what happened to her brain when she died. And she was brain dead. She was on life support. She had no brain function. And as soon as they unplugged her and were going to allow the death process to begin, the rest of the body besides the brain, her brain started firing. And it was her memory sections. There were several other, they were describing what all was going on. It was all this stuff was going on in her brain. A brain that had been moments earlier flatlined dead. And in the article, it said that when you have a cardiac arrest, I think that's the right one. When you have a cardiac arrest, so your heart actually stops. If you die, your brain continues to function for minutes or hours or freaking days. That to me is horrifying.
Well, the cells aren't immediately dead, and they can presumably keep communicating. It's like your muscles. Your muscles are alive. It's like your muscles, without oxygen, they can still flex after a while.
Yeah.
And it's the same with, it's really oxygen.
Yeah.
Is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe flushing out neurotransmitters.
Yeah, they talked about that.
But, it's one of those, I think we talked about maybe last time or something, the idea like what exactly is, what you could say, the thoughts of a person who has no brain function, What would you even classify them as? And so, like, somebody who has very, very minimal brain function because their brain isn't getting any oxygen, what's happening there?
Well, I've read some medical studies about specific cases where somebody was in a coma and was identified as having minimal brain activity, enough to breathe and, swallow and stuff, but other than that, no thought process. And then they woke up. And they described things that went on around them. So I don't trust their machines to say there's no brain activity. I don't trust that. But as to what that brain activity is, I don't know. Or was the person, going back to the near-death experience and out-of-body experiences, had the person, their consciousness left their body, and that's why they were aware of this other stuff going on, although their physical brain was showing no electrical activity. I don't know. Anyway, I have two more 2 more of these stories about prophetic dreams, and these are a little bit better. Another guy that wrote in said he had a dream that a dog catcher was calling him about a dog that had been found and had his information from like 10 years before. He hadn't even thought about this dog in years. He'd rehomed it many years before, and the dog was no longer anywhere on his radar. And so in his dream, he got a call from this dog catcher saying they had the dog. And when he woke up, he thought, that was really weird. And he called his girlfriend and told her about the dream. So now we have a witness. It's not just rewriting your memories to fit the circumstances. Tells her about the dream. She agrees. That's really weird. And so he gets off the phone with her and he checks his email, and he's got an email. The email is from an animal shelter in a different state. And they say they have found the dog and wanted him to come and pick it up. I'm guessing the dog either had a chip or something, or a tattoo that went to a registry, that's how they were able to identify this dog as being his, and it was just old information. He contacted the people he'd rehomed the dog to, and they went and got the dog because it wasn't his dog anymore. But that one I thought was pretty good because there were some very specific things that occurred, and he told somebody, so he had a witness that before the events transpired. So I thought that one was pretty good. So what do you think is happening when that happens?
What do you mean?
What do you think is going on that somebody has a dream of events that haven't occurred yet, and then they occur? I mean, the real times that it happens, not the times where people rewrite.
Presuming they're real.
I believe it.
Well, I think we've talked about the information transfer stuff before. I mean, the fundamental problem is, how is the information moving into their head, you know?
Well, if time has no construct, if time is just BS, then...
So, with your eyes, your skin, whatever, the information is going up your nerves into your brain, where it then can be processed and eventually integrated with your neurological consciousness. That's not a mystery. How would any information, meaning an effect, how would something affect your brain? You know, how would it produce a signal in your brain? And also, I think we talked about a few episodes ago, most things are not like targeted. Most physical processes are very diffuse. So like, for instance, I start a fire over here. It's like heat and warmth and light coming out, but it's not like the word fire is drifting through the air from the thing and going in my head. It would require basically, I think, the information that we recognize is physically present somehow. So the information we recognize, what we would call information that we could recognize, is reconfigurations of our brain states. So like this cluster of neurons is firing this cluster of neurons. So there's some very organized process going on in our heads, and it's different for every person. What would be required for something like, an event over here to transfer that information directly is that information is being transferred in a form that's compatible with reconfigurations of your brain state. So it's like if you can picture, a little configuration packet comes over from the event, goes in, and then influences the actual configuration of your brain. Like words, for instance. So an event happens and God says the event, he's describing the event, and the words of God, which are not necessarily like words you can imagine, come into your psychic ear and you understand them. That's a different kind of information. Alternatively, it could be like you are seeing, you're like remote viewing it. Mm-hmm. So the information is transferring in a typical way from that point. Your astral eyes are somewhere. All of it kind of implies non-locality. So locality is physical process here affects a physical process here, only if there was something in between that physically propagated.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, as far as anyone knows, there has never been a case where anyone has done an experiment and confirmed that two events influence each other faster than light. And that's because, more or less, nothing has been confirmed to influence something non-locally. So there has to be an intermediary somehow.
Not yet confirmed.
Yeah. There could be. It's one of the things that are up in the air with quantum physics. And, if it was possible to get information from something non-locally, so interact with something non-locally, that opens up a whole other can of worms. There are things in your brain disconnected in space. There's a gap between them physically. If information can transfer non-locally, the gap doesn't matter. The gap between those neurons and other stuff in the universe don't matter. Imagine a computer. In a computer, you have physical components that are interacting via essentially little wires etched on silicone. Now imagine a different computer over here. If those could interact non-locally, essentially all computers that are interacting like that are just one giant computer, because they physically...
Right. Well, I think that it's important to remember that there have been some studies done, some experiments where people were able to, actually it wasn't even individuals, it was just events were able to affect other events elsewhere. I can't remember the exact details of it, but there was one where I believe they taught mice or rats how to go through a maze, and let's say in New York City, and then in Paris, those rats were able to go through the same maze faster. They were not related to the rats or mice in New York City. They were not, there was no communication with them, but they were able to. And so there was obviously something going on beyond our understanding that made that happen. And that was a real scientific experiment. That wasn't just a BS thing.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that. It kind of reminds me of the idea. I think I've talked about this before, of a noosphere. I mean, the literal sense is a noosphere is the sphere of human knowledge or human understanding or whatever. But the more supernatural, paranormal, whatever interpretation is, there's literally like this gestalt consciousness above all of humanity, that humanity is forming through its collective thoughts, and then that conscious layer of consciousness that encompasses all people is influencing the people, which in a sense is also, I mean, there is some truth to that, like fundamentally, memes, which are essentially how people learn how to behave in general. They replicate what other people are doing. That's the literal sense, like, oh, that's really literally happening. But the idea that's happening paranormally, also the idea of like gods and such. Imagine if there was a god, but it formed just like that process I just described. There's a paranormal entity that's the psychic connection of all people. Would you be able to distinguish that entity from like a supernatural super entity, like an origin creator of the universe, whatever? Which is kind of fundamentally the important thing is being able to consistently distinguish between alternatives. And as usual, in this situation, you have alternatives. There's not like any reasonable, reliable way to...
Right. You can't really determine what happened.
And it's important to recognize that if you have an undeniable paranormal experience, whatever, that's completely fine for you on a personal level. I mean, you're now convinced. It's important to understand the reasoning behind the scientific process and whatnot, because science is rhetorical art. It's about convincing other people. It just so happens that doing an experiment that other people can do on their own to get the same results is really convincing. Science has nothing to do with anything other than convincing people. It's like in mathematics, the analog is proofs or proving things. I mean, the thing is already true or not true. You know, it's already out there. You write the proof to bring somebody kicking and screaming to the same conclusion. And they just say, I can't deny it. It's foolproof. It's proof that you're connecting one thing to another thing. So in experiment, science, whatever, you do it to convince other people. And the convincing is the process of distinguishing between the alternatives.
I think that the most important thing for you to understand is that people who have an experience that convinces them that something else is going on don't really give a crap if somebody else believes them because they have that experience. So I have one last story.
Okay.
This one I thought was really interesting because this is more like the kind of dreams I used to have. Don't have anymore, but I used to have when I kept a dream diary. So this lady had a dream that she was an actual grizzly bear, and she had a little cub that was following her around, and they were like out in the wilderness somewhere. She said she could see the world through, like, from the perspective of being a grizzly bear and the thought process of being a grizzly bear, and it was just phenomenal. So sometime later, after she'd had that dream, I'm not sure how long, she met a guy online and was chatting with him. He was just some random guy, and he was into nature and Native American type spirituality. So she told him her dream because it's a dream. So, you know, spirituality, it had a grizzly bear, so Native American or whatever. I guess that makes a kind of sense that would be something you'd bring up. And he said, oh shit, you're going to have a baby, because she'd been a grizzly bear with a cub following her.
Oh, okay.
She explained that it really wasn't possible because she wasn't in a relationship and she was 41 years old. So really pretty unlikely she would have a baby under those circumstances. And then the guy, he ghosted her after that, and she never talked to him again. But 6 months later, after she'd talked to that guy, she met another man, and she ended up marrying him. And very soon after that, she realized the relationship wasn't working, and she asked him to leave. She said it took all of her energy, like it just zapped her energy out of her, that this guy, you know, to have to tell this guy, our marriage is over, you have to leave. And so she laid down to take a nap. So it was the day she tells him to leave. She lays down to take a nap. And she had a dream. And in her dream, her cousin showed her a pregnancy test. And she looked at it in disbelief. And the cousin said, you're pregnant. She woke up from the dream and ran to the store to buy a pregnancy test. And it was positive. She said that before all that, when she and her husband were still on good terms, they'd talked about kids. And he'd said he was sterile. And of course, she had her own issues of being an older person. So she went on to have a baby. As I was relating that, I realized one big problem with that whole story is that it was the same day she told him to leave. She became very exhausted. And she said she was like only 2 weeks pregnant. So she, you know, there was no other signs of pregnancy. But there are signs of pregnancy. And a lot of people aren't in touch with their bodies enough to recognize them. So maybe at some sub-levels she did recognize it. And that's why she had the dream. But I want to tell you one story, one dream that I had a long time ago. I was 16 years old. So when I kept a dream diary, so of course that's gone now, but at that time I had proof to myself, if no one else, that I had actually had the dream prior to the events that took place. I dreamt that I was in a car with a friend of mine. His name was Harold Doremus. Yes, that was his actual name. It was child abuse. With a last name like Doremus, they should not have named him Harold. But in any case, Harold Doremus, who also had a speech impediment and looked pretty weird, he was driving me somewhere, and we drove around, and we drove to this tiny little trailer park full of tiny little trailers. And he pulled up to one, and I got out, and I went up to the door and knocked on the door, and the door opened, and my then boyfriend answered the door, and I woke up. Weeks, if not months later, Harold Doremus, for whatever reason, he said, I was looking for my boyfriend, couldn't find him. He said, I know where he is. I got in the car. He drives to another town to a tiny little crappy trailer park and pulls up in front of this trailer. And he said he's in there. And I got out, went up to the door, knocked on the door, and there he was. So it was exactly like the dream. Exactly. There was another case where I had a dream, and it also included, it was also about a trailer park. Not that I always dream about trailer parks or anything. And I dreamt that I walked up to a door in a trailer park and knocked on it, and my ex-sister-in-law opened the door, and my niece and nephew were with her. My brother was no longer with my sister-in-law, and those children lived with my brother. So this was very weird. And that was the whole dream. Just walking up to this trailer. It was, night, as dreams sometimes are weird. Knocking on the door, opens the door. And because it was a weird little old trailer, I was on the ground, she was up above. And there are those two little kids. So months passed, and my brother got a visit from his ex-wife, and she came over and was visiting with him and the children, and she said there was something she needed and asked if he would go across the street to a store and get it. Maybe it was cigarettes, who knows. And so, because I can't remember. And he left her there with the children, and when he came back, she was gone. And he called me up hysterical and said she took the kids. And so this was later in the day, and so he came and got me, and we got in his truck, and I said, trust me. And I led him to this trailer park. He parked around the corner. I got out, walked down the street until I came to a trailer that I felt like looked like in my dream. I knocked at the door. She opened the door. She said, what are you doing here? And I said, oh, I was looking for you. And she acted really freaked out because why would I have gone to that trailer? And I said, okay, well, never mind. And there were the two little kids. And I left, and I went and told my brother, went back to the truck, and we sat in the truck, and she and a man and those kids came out and got in a car and started driving away. And we were able to block them and get the children out of the car and leave. So that was very, very specific. And those are things that I wrote down. So I believe in prophetic dreams. Absolutely. I don't know why it happens, where it comes from, how it happens. I don't know, but I believe in it. The ones that were written, people wrote to me about, you can question them, and really the only person that matters who believes it is them. They believe it. That happened. Our contact information is in the show notes. You can email us, text us, or even call and leave a 3-minute voicemail. And as always, if you have a story you want to tell, send it to us. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.